Welcome to the Children's Book Author Podcast. I'm your host, Elena Page. If you write for children, or it's always been your dream to, you're in the right place. As the children's book author, I'm on a quest to discover everything there is about writing, publishing, and marketing children's books, as well as how to supercharge my creativity, skyrocket my productivity, and absolutely everything else there is to know about how to be the best, so you can be too. Join me as I interview fabulous guests and become the children's book author. Welcome back to another episode of the Children's Book Author Podcast. And today I'm interviewing Holly Dunn all about cover design. And you'll hear me having nightmares about cover design because I don't know if you're like me, but at the time of getting a new cover and being a self-published author, at times I might take some shortcuts or try this person or try that person. And, you know, they're really well priced a lot of the time, but they might sort of leave a little something out. Like on my original cover designs for Meditation Adventures for Kids, the main character, Lolly, was on the front cover, but some of the line work didn't move across with her. And every time I looked at the cover, all I saw was the missing line work. So, you know, when I changed the covers and I was like, the line work's good. But the sales went down from the new covers, and literally, I think every day for the past 5 years, I've woken up in a cold sweat going, do I change them back? Do I leave them as they are? Do I change them back? Do I leave them as they are? Do I pay for new ones? Covers can be really, really stressful and very, very expensive. I've seen other authors with covers that I know were expensive. I know who did them for them. And then a few years later, I've noticed, they've updated their cover. And my mind says, I don't know. Did I like the original ones better? Maybe I did. I don't know. Oh my gosh, hold on. They spent that money. A cover is such an important element of your book. It is that initial don't judge a book by its cover, but you are going to judge a book by its cover. And I've bought very, very many, mostly middle grade books based solely on their cover. I haven't even read the blurb. I've just gone, what a cover. Love this. Got to own it. It's going to look gorgeous on my bookshelf. So I urge you to look after your nervous system during this episode and when it comes to covers in general, because I've learned that you don't necessarily have to spend a fortune on covers to get the best covers. And sometimes when you do spend a fortune on covers, it's worth it because it's such a great cover. So like anything in the publishing industry, you don't necessarily get what you pay for. You have to be discerning. Sometimes you get above and beyond what you pay for. Sometimes it is worth the extraordinary amount of money, and sometimes it isn't worth the extraordinary amount of money. But most importantly of all, do keep in mind that you'll meet 5 people that say, it's amazing, worth every penny, looks so good. And you'll meet 5 people that say, you just wasted your money, that is crap. So you've got to just go with your own gut feel and where you're at the moment. And covers can always be updated. That's the beauty of them. Perhaps in trad publishing, they might start with fantastic covers, but then often that book goes out of print in a certain amount of years. So they probably don't have to worry about updating covers like us self-published authors do, or you, if you're a self-published author. Likewise, if you've got some titles that are trad and some titles that are self, you have to think of your self-published titles in a very different way, a product. Perhaps think of your favorite food or a food in the supermarket where they changed the branding and then you said, gosh, I like the old label way better than that. That could happen with books, or it might just be the change that's making that happen in your brain. And then eventually you get used to that new label and you think, I really like this new label. I can't even remember the old one. But either way, it is sort of like a rebranding to change your covers. Covers. All right. today you're going to hear all about how Holly hand illustrates her covers, which, oh my gosh, I'm so jealous. One day I will have hand illustrated, particularly font covers perhaps. We shall see. But again, you might not even like it. I have spoken to some authors who dislike that look and love beautiful fonts. So there's so many different ways. You're going to learn all about that today with Holly. So enjoy today's interview. Other than that, what have I been up to? Gosh, painting, lots of painting and selling them, which has been great because that's, it's the next step. It's like even in the author world, right? I made a book. And you turn up and you say, look at me, I made a book. And it's fantastic. But then you go, oh gosh, how do I sell the book? So two very different things. So the making of art and the selling of art, two very, very different things. And meanwhile, in the book writing, I have still been working diligently behind the scenes on the Magician's Academy, which I thought was there, but then no, it's not there at all. Mainly because I got rid of book 4, so I have to roll 3 and 4 kind of into one very beautifully. 5 villains, 50,000 timelines. The joys of being an author. But I will turn up one day at the beginning of this podcast and say, I did it. And that's the most important thing, perseverance. Or perhaps it's a much smarter move to just stop writing that and move on to other projects. We shall never know because I am a little bit persistent on this one. I'm very committed today. Hopefully on the next podcast, I don't turn up and say, I've quit. But that is the joys and the decisions that we as creatives have every step of the way. In other news, the splendid Secrets of 66 Lily Pilly Lane, which you will hear me talk about in this episode, is getting closer and closer to being published in a different language. Yay. So I will let you know when that happens, just out of interest. I've not had a foreign rights deal before. This is my first, unlike some others that I've interviewed who have them rolling in. Good on you. It's been a massive learning curve, and I guess like all things, once you do it once, then you know how to do it and you can do it again and again and again. So I'll keep you updated on that when that is released. Also, I'm curious because I've noticed that a lot of creatives have started setting up Substack newsletters. So I'm bringing that to your attention, not because I've set one up, because I haven't, but I know Darcy Patterson, who was on the podcast, has set one up, which is really great. And you get a certain amount of that information for free and a certain amount of that information when you subscribe. And I think it's kind of like, a different sort of Patreon model where you are getting educated and getting behind the scenes and learning things from different people. It doesn't necessarily have to be creatives, though I've noticed more and more creative people are popping up there. It's becoming a little bit of its own community, the Substack people. And I'm just putting it out there. It's an interesting model of how to share your knowledge and insights and wisdom and your journey and, like everything, get paid for it because, it's nice to get paid, isn't it? Isn't it? Yeah. Given that, especially in the creative field, we do an awful lot of work and don't know if we're ever going to get paid for it. So that's a really interesting model. If you haven't looked at it, go and have a look at Substack, see who you might want to follow on there, and perhaps consider starting one of your own. Perhaps that's a really good way for you to share what you've already learned. And remember, you're really sharing and teaching others that are a few steps behind you. So you don't have to be, the most magnificent expert of all time to share your knowledge, your wisdom, your journey, your expertise. There's somebody always a few steps behind that is wanting to learn how you got to that one step ahead of them. And in fact, it's nicer to learn from someone who's only a couple of steps ahead rather than 50,000 trillion steps ahead, because that can be quite overwhelming and intimidating. So that's all for this week. Enjoy today's podcast. I will mention one more thing, which is that Holly mentioned something about August. Keep in mind that's August last year because this interview was recorded prior to that. So I'm sure she's already done that process where you can see her design a cover from scratch. So go and look up Holly Dunn on Instagram. There will be the links in the show notes and you will see that would have already been released. And this is the last episode that I have pre-recorded, so I've caught up to myself. Yay! I don't have to be mean to myself any longer for not having done that. I have caught up, which means that I will be reviewing. If you have sent in a request to be interviewed, I will finally get round to reviewing all those and start reaching out to new guests. And the aim, so cheer me on, from wherever you are, the aim is to release them as I record them. Will I maintain this pressure? I think so. So that's what I'm going to aim for. I've got a few people who are about to book in. So as they are recorded, I will edit, and release them and hopefully bring you some amazing new interviews this year that weren't recorded last year. Don't you just love my vulnerability and honesty on air? I'm sure I regret that at some point. But anyway, it's who I am and how I like to be. So I hope that you're valuing the podcast, enjoying the guests, and learning and growing on your path to becoming the children's book author. Welcome back to the Children's Book Author podcast with me, Elena Page. And today I have a bright, sparkly and exciting new guest, Holly Dunn, who is the genius, and yes, I will use that word, the genius behind Holly Dunn Design. She does custom illustrations and I've got to look down, hand lettering. Can you believe that? Hand lettering for cover designs. And she also creates resources to help indie authors on their self-publishing journey. So many things to talk about today. Welcome to the show, Holly.
Thanks so much for having me. This is super exciting.
Yay. So, gosh, where do I start? Start me wherever you want to. Tell me your story. How did you get here? Where did you come from? And why do you do what you do?
That is a very good question. It was a very roundabout way of coming into this role that I've sort of created for myself. And I'm sure there's a much more linear path to doing what I'm doing. But I went off to university to study English literature and art history, which I loved, like all that, finding out about like how other people have created art and like the context behind it and the historical side of all of that. But as I was coming to the end of my degree, I was really starting to feel a bit creatively starved because while I was doing all this nonfiction writing, the essays and everything, I really wasn't getting to scratch that creative itch. That I've always done creative things, whether that be like music or drawing. I've always done drawing or like graphic design, all these other things. So I sort of got towards the end of my degree and went, you know what? I need to be doing something that really fulfills me creatively. Otherwise, I'm not my best self. So that's kind of where it came from. And I decided I was going to teach myself graphic design and I was going to be a graphic designer and one of these digital nomads who could, travel all over the world and work from anywhere. And after doing a bit of traveling, I realized that actually traveling and working simultaneously just doesn't work for me. But I did learn quite a lot about graphic design. I read a lot of books about it, like watching a lot of YouTube videos, that kind of thing. And, having done art all throughout my life, I have a fairly good eye for composition and things like that. And then I worked at a bookshop after I graduated and kind of I had this epiphany moment where I went, there are all these books. Somebody designs the covers for all these books. Why couldn't that be me? So that's sort of what kicked it off. I started putting together a portfolio of my work, designed some covers for some of my favorite books or books that I thought would be interesting and challenging to design for, and started a YouTube channel around the same time where I was talking about book design and also just like book reviews as well. And so that sort of then morphed into more of the illustration side of things, because I'm not very good at photo manipulation and I don't enjoy it. So like Photoshop is not my thing. I really enjoy drawing to solve problems and using illustration to solve design problems. So that's it. Sort of then morphed into that. I had the idea of starting or getting a job at a publisher, and I actually moved to the UK to do that. And I had a few interviews, but of course I didn't have any experience doing like working in a design studio or anything. So I can see why I didn't get hired, but you know, I got some good responses from my portfolio. But then I interviewed for my YouTube channel a guy called Leo Nichols, who is an amazing cover designer, and he does like illustrated covers and works freelance. And I went, that's what I want to do. So yeah, then I just continued working on the sort of the illustration side of things. Taught myself lettering. I took some online courses for lettering and typography, and it all sort of tied in together into what I do today.
Oh, what an amazing story. And I love that so much of it is really a story of self-discovery. Like it was I like that, I don't like that, I like this, I don't like that, oh, I'd love to live there everywhere, but actually maybe I don't work when I live everywhere.
Yeah.
That's so good, so good. So it's incredible, and you know, I encourage the listeners to go and look at your cover designs, because you know, I didn't ask you to be on the show just because you do that. You actually do it really, really well. So at what point did you think, I do this well? Does that ever come, is what I'm asking as a fellow creative. Ooh. Particularly because you are, you know, offering services, like you're sort of, like you said, a freelancer. And so how does that part of it work? Because that would scare the shit out of me, gotta say.
Yes. Gosh, I mean, I feel like it's a day-to-day, it changes day to day. Some days I'll look at my work and go, oh, why am I even trying? Or I'll see other people's work and go, oh, yeah, I should just give up now because they're so much more amazing. And some days I will be like, yeah, I'm nailing this every time and it's so good. And I'll look at other people's work and go, and it'll motivate me to do more and to do better. And I think over time it's become more of the latter. Not to say that I'm overconfident. I definitely still have those days where I'm like, what am I doing? But it's definitely one of those things. The more you do it, the more you work with clients as well, and you really nail down a process for doing this. The confidence comes along with it. So yeah,
that makes a lot of sense. So especially when you said you nailed down a process. And so what is that process? What does it look like? I'm ordering a design from you. What happens next?
So the first thing is we jump on a call. We would have a conversation much like this. And I just want to know as much about your book as possible. And and more recently, I've actually started reading the book. So once a client's actually signed up, paid the deposit, and we're good to go, I will read the manuscript of their book, which is something I didn't used to do. And I know that like most cover designers don't do that because it's just not feasible to be able to do it. But I found it really helps me with the whole process. It gives me so much more context for what I'm working with. It also allows me to be a cheerleader for indie authors and to really like share the work. And I want to work on projects that I'm really excited about as well. So for me, reading the book is a way for me to really connect with it on a whole other level. If the manuscript isn't available, or it's too tight a turnaround, then I will read a synopsis and a blurb if they've got one. and work from that. But in an ideal world, I do read the book. And then it's basically the design process. It's very much like the concept development, final, that kind of process that any designer will go through when working on something like this. There are a few differences in the way I work. So because I'm an illustrator, we start off with sketches. Normally they are very scribbly and probably don't make much sense to anyone apart from me. But that's just to sort of get a loose idea of the composition. I won't even write out the text properly. I'll just sort of do a bit of a scribble. This is where the title goes. This is where the author names goes, and just get that composition nailed down. And then I'll move on to actually turning into something that's legible to human beings. So this is what I will show to the author or the publisher, so that they're a lot more refined, but they're still in black and white, which I find is really important, because color is so subjective. I might do like 3 designs, one of which is purple, but also perfect for your design, but you don't like purple. And then you go, oh, well, I don't like that one. But it's because of the color rather than the design. So I like to separate that and bring in color at the next stage, which is development, which is where we choose a direction to go in. Then normally I'd do 3 concepts, but choose which concept works best. There might be a bit of a combination between one concept and another, and we'll move forward with that, put together like the final line work, because a lot of my work is sort of linear based, and then add color in. And once that's all been nailed down, then we move on to the print file, because presumably most people are doing a paperback, sometimes a hardback as well. So laying it out, making sure that it's all ready to go for Amazon, for Ingram Spark, Barnes & Noble, whatever you're printing through. Maybe they're getting some books printed in China. So yeah, it's just working with whatever templates are available for that. And then I do like to get a proof copy as well, because I really like to be able to see that as a designer, because sometimes it's just not quite translating, or like the colors aren't quite what we'd hoped they would be, because there's always a difference between how colors look on the screen versus in print, and even from one screen to another. So I like to check that it's looking the way I anticipated that it would. And also I do interior formatting sometimes as well for authors. So I like to check that that's all sort of reading well as well. So yeah, that's kind of the process. And then the author gets to do the cover reveal, and I like to be a part of that where possible as well, so that I can do a shout out on my Instagram, and yeah, just help to share the buzz about the book. So yeah, that's the process.
Incredible process. Like, it's so holistic, so involved, so caring. Really, that's the word that comes at me, because like as you were talking that, I'd be like, oh, could you be nurtured like that by your cover designer? Like all the way through. Oh, such a nice nurtured feeling. Whereas
yeah,
and not to put down my cover designer, they are great, but every time 5,000 covers come back at me with all different colors, you're right, this happens. And luckily, I have a daughter who has a good eye for composition like you, because that is a talent, actually. It's or a skill. I'm going to say it's a talent. And I'll show it to her, and she knows when something's off. She's like, nah, the color's throwing you. It's this. So it's incredible that you've almost spotted some of those, I'll call them errors or possibilities, and you've problem solved around them so that the author does get really the best design for the book.
Yeah, and that's something that's come over time. Like, I've definitely refined this process over the years, and I've made mistakes along the way and realized, okay, I have to be clearer on this, or clearer in with my expectations for the author up front, making sure that I've got a contract, and that everything's clearly outlined, like the process is outlined, so that there's no like, oh, hang on, what's going on? So they know when they're going to be getting the concepts and the development and the final designs. And it has definitely been something that I've changed over the years. And like I said, I've only recently started reading the whole manuscript as a sort of standard for the design. But it's interesting you said about getting like lots of designs from your designer, and that's also quite common. I think when you work with publishers, they expect to see quite a lot of different designs, especially the bigger publishers. But I tend to think that you're better off spending more time on say 3 that really nail the brief, because otherwise, I mean, it's a bit like, you walk into a bookshop and there are so many books, so many options of things to read. It can be really overwhelming, but you can narrow down what you want based on some criteria. So, and that's why we put together a brief at the beginning. I didn't really outline that. That's step 1, really, is putting together, like, this is what we want out of this cover. That's the genre, that is the target audience, that's any comp covers, so comparative covers in the same genre that have the same target reader. And that's a really important thing. I can't believe I skipped that over.
I was going to ask about that. Don't worry, it was next on my list. I had it ready to
go. So that's really important to ensure that we're on the same page to start with. And also, I can get keywords from you. You might say that my book is mysterious and atmospheric, and that's immediately bringing up images in my mind, but they may be quite different images to what's coming up in your mind. So that's why I like to have those comparative covers. And I also ask, what covers of mine do you like specifically? Because if all the comparative covers are ones that are done with photo manipulation, for instance, then I'm feeling a bit stuck, because I'm going, that's not what I do. So, and also any other sort of images like mood boards, things that really evoke that imagery, because it's a visual language. That's what we're working with. So it's important to be able to translate that correctly.
Right. Yeah, it's a visual language. Ooh, that's a quote. That it's a quote. It's a visual language we're working with. Yeah. Talk to me a bit more about that. Like, so, one of my things is, like, you can see 2 different covers, or not even covers, let's say illustration, or even font, and some look professional and some don't. And it's often not because they're hand-drawn or not hand-drawn. It's like there's something, I don't know what I'm picking up on, like something can be hand-drawn and look really professional and still even kind of, I don't want to say scrappy, but, the style can be a bit sort of loose, and then someone else can do that and it doesn't look professional. And my brain goes, well, hold on, what makes it look professional? Like, what actually is it that's making it look professional? So is it something to do with that design language that actually creates that feel of something looking professional and not looking professional, when you can't really put your finger on it when you don't have design language like me?
Yeah, it's hard to talk about without having an example. But I like to think of a font, or the whatever typography is being used, whether it's hand lettering or an existing font. That to me is like the tone, like how you're saying something. So you can say one thing in 2 very different ways, and I mean, this is why we have emojis in our text messages, so that we can properly say, if, I don't know, you might be joking about something, you want that to come across that you're joking, so you put in a little, I don't know, laughy face emoji. And I saw something amazing on Instagram the other day that was like, tone is everything, or fonts are everything. And it was the difference between, like, somebody had written, I love you in like a red lipstick, and it was like all cute looking. And then there was another one which looked like it was a horror movie font. Like I said, "I love you," but it was like dripping blood. And so the message, like the words are the same, but the message and the tone of that is very, very different. So that's how I think of it. It's a bit like the music that you'd use to convey particular emotions in a scene in a film. So it's getting the right tone for the book. This is why comp covers are really important. So something like contemporary romance books usually use a lot of lettering, but a particular type of lettering. Often you'll see like sort of a very sort of loopy, scripty type lettering, or something that looks very handwritten. And those convey a particular tone of like, this is really personable, really conversational, or this is really beautiful and elegant. Like historical fiction, you might see really like script calligraphy, that kind of thing. So it's getting the tone of the book right, and of course then it has to go with the imagery. So that's another reason I love doing hand lettering, is because I can do the imagery. Say we've got roses on the cover with sort of swirly, loopy designs, which is something I do quite a bit of. Then we could use a style of lettering that echoes the kinds of shapes that are in the illustration. And that sort of ties everything together really nicely. And often I'll have a hard time finding a font that fits just right. And, by the time I'd gone through all these different fonts and chosen something, I might as well letter it. And then, you've got something that's really custom for the book as well. And lettering is a very, very common thing on book covers across the board. So
are there particular genres that you work, that you're kind of are your favorite? Or you lean towards?
Well, there are definitely styles or genres that my style is more applicable to. Mm-hmm. I don't do a lot of crime fiction, for instance, because it doesn't really fit. But something like historical fiction really works well for my style, because I do a lot of sort of vintage inspired by vintage book bindings. So that works really well. I do like YA, quite a bit of young adult, and again fits well with my illustration style. Historical fantasy and YA fantasy. I do a little bit of middle grade. I tend to do more lettering work for middle grade. So I'll work with publishers and do the lettering for the design that somebody else has done. So another illustrator's done the image, and then I come in and add in the type, which is a really fun thing to do. Actually, it's a really interesting challenge, because you've been left with a certain space to work with. You've got to fill in the blanks here. So yeah, I do that a bit. And what other genres do I work in? A bit of sort of contemporary fiction as well. I've got some examples. I don't know if it's worth showing them.
Yeah, show us.
Most people will be listening to the podcast.
Well, there's a few that watch, so yeah, show us.
But yeah, so one like this, this one I actually made. Most of my work is digital, drawn on the iPad. But this one, I actually made a plate. I had a plate and I painted it, and then I was going to break it and then add the text, but I couldn't make myself break it because it had taken such a long time to paint. So I broke it digitally. And so this actually is an exception to the rule. I did use Photoshop for this. Most of the time I'm working on Procreate on the iPad, which is a great drawing app.
So that one was, for those listening, Broken is Beautiful. And it was this beautiful china plate with a big crack down the middle. Looked amazing.
Yes. And it's contemporary fiction. This one is also contemporary fiction. So it's called A Smatter of Minutes, and it's got lots of silhouettes that are meant to look like paper cutouts of people that are sort of they've all got different patterns on them, and then there's a woman in the middle. So very kind of colourful and bright. And then something else I've done recently, this is actually a proof copy, so it's not, it's got the ugly stripe through the middle from Amazon, but this is something that's a little bit different. It's a young adult cover. So I did a little bit of, this is mostly a font that I've then adapted a little bit to work with the cover. It's called Secrets of the Nile by Pauline Turner. This is the first of a series of 6 books in the Time Travel Chronicles. So this has been super fun to design, and I cannot wait to share the rest of them. But we've got a figure on this one, which is a little bit unusual for me, sort of fully illustrated, then with the Sydney Harbour Bridge in the background and a and one of the pyramids, and actually on the back we've got the other pyramids. So that was a really fun one to design for as well, and again a little bit different. But the process for these in general is very, very similar, even though all the books are very different to each other.
Yeah, they are really different. It really showcases your abilities across different styles. And I love that you said you used on that last one a font, but then you altered it. So you can actually take fonts and then add little flourishes to them.
Yes, and I don't tend to do that so much, but I think because this was a 6-book series, I knew that I wanted a sort of a framework of this font, and it's a font that's used very commonly on young adult fiction titles. So I wanted, and fantasy titles in particular, and this is, has that kind of fantastical sci-fi element because it's got the time travel. So I chose that font because it really does indicate this is young adult. And so that was really important. And then actually a lot of the font just worked as it was, without having to do too much to it. But others, I might start off with a font and then sort of end up completely discarding it.
I have a theory that actually font is the most important piece on your cover that distinguishes whether it's looks, trad published versus bad self-published. Not, like, do you know what I mean? Like, everyone goes, I can tell that's self-published. It's usually the font. I don't know, maybe I'm wrong on that. You're the cover designer. But, like, it's a lot more not absolutely getting a professional font is brilliant. I think that already helps immensely to make it look more like it's trad published. But a lot of very special hand-lettered fonts I've noticed trad publishers are using more and more and more. And I often think, I need a hand-lettered font cover to, really make that book pop and be kind of, like you said, different, but still look trad published. I think it's kind of magical.
Well, you should probably sort of define what a font is versus hand lettering as well. I probably should have done that before. But so a font is we also have a typeface. So just to confuse things further, a typeface is a collection of fonts that all go together. So you've got like Times New Roman, you've got Times New Roman bold, you've got Times New Roman italic. You might have, I don't know, I don't use Times New Roman that much, but
does anyone these days use Times New Roman? Please don't use Times New Roman.
There might be like a light version of it, so that it's a family of fonts that goes together. A font is the individual font within that. So whether it's Times New Roman italic, that is a font, and then hand lettering is when somebody goes in and draws the letters as a sort of custom thing. And it's not the same as calligraphy. Calligraphy is writing in a particular style. So it's done, if you're writing the letter C, it would be done with one stroke. Whereas if you're drawing or hand lettering a letter C, you're sort of going in and adding weight to it in different ways. It's not just like one stroke of a pen. It's going in and drawing that character. So it is it's a more expensive way to go, because you have to, unless you can do it yourself, you have to hire somebody who knows how to do that and how to work with the imagery that you have. But it does end up, you end up with something that's very custom and very different to anything else. And you can also use it as a way, like I said before, to make it very clear this is a young adult title, or this is a romance book, because, as you said as well, the font or the whatever lettering style is used is really important for saying, like, this is a good book, for one thing. Like, this is a book that has been well published, and I think it's the thing that is the easiest to mess up for indie authors. And it tells you about the genre big time. It really is a very important communication tool for the designer. So I would say that even if you have an image for your book, but you're not sure how to turn it into a book cover, hiring somebody who specializes in cover design just to do the type, like if you're on a tight budget, that is a really savvy use of your money, because you're right, it tends to be the thing that makes the difference between something that looks professionally done and something that doesn't. And of course, you can mess up the imagery and everything else as well, but there are very specific sort of conventions that you need to be aware of and use. Not to mention also the fact that you need to be able to read the title, even when it's at Amazon thumbnail size, and it needs to be legible when it's and very easy to read and clear, and also communicate the genre when it's at a larger size in a bookshop. There are different applications about where this book is going to be sold. So knowing all of those things, like it's a lot. And as cover designers, we do spend a lot of time looking at what the trends are in the market, what the genre conventions are. Some genres change the conventions quite quickly. Like, it's very trend driven. Things change fast. Something like crime, it doesn't. It's very much that I'm sure you're picturing a crime cover in your mind now. It's probably very similar to what's in my mind, and it's been very similar for the past decade, really. Whereas something like YA is much more trend driven, and you've got different conventions that happen over time. So yeah,
I think you drove that font point home very eloquently, way more eloquently than I did. And you're right, don't skimp on the font. And on one of my books, The Magician's Convention, I think it was, the person who did the illustration, incredible illustration, and he said, "Oh, here, I did the lettering for you too." And it was like, oh no. Like, no. It just, like, I remember showing it to the kids and they were like, "Well, I'm not sure about the lettering, Mum." And it was like, what about it? Like, it looks good to me. They're like, "Nah." And then got the font changed, and even the guy that did it said, like, "Oh no, that looks way better, because I'm actually, lettering's not my thing. I just did it to put it in, in place if you wanted to use it." And it just elevated the book to another level. It's incredible to me that font can do that. So don't use Times New Roman, whatever it's called, Times New Roman on anything ever. If you're going to do your own font or something, go to Creative Market or something, and at least get something that looks nice. But you just go that, what you're talking about, that one step ahead of it tying into the front cover. In fact, one of my covers at the moment, which I haven't not written that book yet, it's way, way away before I write that book. Do not write to me if you hear me talking about this and say, "When's that book coming out?" The cover illustrations, again, incredible. And this time I got the cover designer, or the cover artist, to write the main character's name, Poppy Snow, in like 3D, and he did that amazingly. And then I gave it to my usual cover designers, who then did the rest of the font. But I'm like, I don't think I like it. Like, it doesn't quite gel in, like I might have to hand it to you, Holly, and you can gel it in. But just these, like you said, these little things can make such a big difference. And how it looks in the size. I know I'm talking a lot about my books because it's all I've got to reference, really. I don't look at covers all day
examples, yeah.
the way you do. But The Splendid Secrets of 66 Lily Pilly Lane has beautiful font, beautiful illustration. It has won an award for its cover design. But, and I say this, but when it's little, it's red writing, red drawing, it all blends in and you can't see anything. So it doesn't work when it's little, and I'm still going. The Meditation Adventures for Kids series that I did years and years and years ago had a very colourful design, and it used to sell really well. And then I changed the cover design, and they look beautiful and consistent and much better. Like the original cover designer didn't cut the character out properly and little things like that. But the sales went, and every so often I wake up in the middle of the night and I have nightmares of, like, change the covers back. Would you bloody change the covers back? And I think, no, leave them. I paid for those new covers. So, like this little thing called covers, which it's actually a really big thing, is the point and the reason I'm telling you all these little crazy cover design stories, because it can make such a massive difference to how your book's perceived, to how it sells, and to the overall cohesion of the project. So that was my
it's your brand as well as an author. So that's yet another thing to take into consideration is how are you presenting yourself as a brand, and how are you, if you've got a series, how can somebody tell that these are all part of the same series? That's really important. And it's interesting what you were saying about the thumbnail. One of and that you said it was sort of red and red and red. So contrast is one of the most important things. So visual contrast is like having black and white being the biggest contrast. But if you've got a dark background for your cover, you want to have the lightest possible title. Not always, but most of the time. And there are little tricks that you can do to make it stand out more, and so that it will be very clear when you're looking at it, when it's that tiny Amazon thumbnail. And it's tricky as well if you have a long title. That makes it more difficult. But even if you have a shorter title, then there's always the decision of, do you make the title like the biggest thing on the cover, or do you make the image more important? And I would say 9 times out of 10, the title is the most important thing.
Okay.
You've got this kind of visual hierarchy, and being able to read the title and know what it is at a glance is, to me, usually the most important things. There are exceptions to that. And I mean, certainly if you're Stephen King, by all means have Stephen King as the biggest thing. Like, obviously that's the most important thing because people are looking for that name. But most of us are not Stephen King. And having the title more bigger than the author name, for instance, is important. And also having it eye-catching, and there are exceptions to all of these rules, of course. But as a general rule of thumb, especially if you're designing your own cover, or if you are looking at and evaluating a cover that you've got, or several cover options that you have, you want to be looking at things like the contrast, and thinking about, can you read it when it's really small? How does it look in print as well? Many different factors.
Yeah, lots. And you're aware of them all, which is, really fantastic. That's so important. Like, a lot, you're not necessarily going to go buy an independent author's book from the bookstore, and it's very different. Like I said, the Splendid Secrets book looks stunning in real life, and that's where it won its award from. But when you look at it little, you're like,
Yeah.
And that could impact its sales. So at the end of the day, like, I know we want, really pretty, stunning cover, but you do have to think of sales, and having a designer who thinks like that is a really big plus. So, I think it's important we're talking about it. Yeah.
Yeah, and certainly the genre side of things is really important as well. That are you fitting into those genre conventions? Because I think a lot of people think, oh, I need to have a book cover that really stands out. And on the one hand, yes, you do want to stand out to some degree, but it's actually more important that you fit in with the genre expectations that are there within your book. Because if you're writing sci-fi, for instance, and you don't have any kind of indication on the cover that this is set in space, or that there are aliens involved or robots, then somebody who picks it up might be a bit surprised when they start to read it, or hopefully your blurb will make that clear as well. But I think it's really important to communicate that genre as sort of the number one thing, really. You don't have to tell too much about your book, and that's another mistake that authors make, is wanting to have like a particular scene from the book on the cover, or wanting to have this and that and like the kitchen sink on the cover, which you can do, and there are ways of doing that, but it also needs to fit into the genre conventions. So yeah, it's a lot to think about.
Yeah, it is a lot to think about. My covers for my middle grade books have a very sort of painterly style, which it does. I'm going to say, you might disagree, Holly, which is fine. It does kind of fit the genre. And what do I mean by that? Like, there's kids, it shows the age. It is very colourful and has that painterly style. But, and again, this gives me nightmares in the middle of the night. I have a lot of nightmares in the middle of the night, if you're not catching on so far. Yeah. About covers. That's why you should always pay like top dollar to get your cover design properly from the beginning, is the lesson here. Not that I didn't pay a lot of money for the illustrations, but if you look at the middle grade genre that's coming out of, I don't know, I'll say Penguin because they're the top of mind thing, but there's a lot of them. They've got a kind of illustration style that's not as painterly as mine. Like, sort of, mine's a bit painterly realistic kind of. Theirs is a bit, I don't know what the proper way to describe it is. It's sort of a more, it's still realistic, but not a bit more kind of, I'm not talking about chapter books, because they've got even more of an unrealistic sort of cartoony element. They're still realistic, but they've got they don't look completely real. I don't know, you got to go have a look at them to know what I'm getting. Yeah. I'm butchering my descriptions here, Holly, but not quite like mine. So mine's still like, it does look like a middle grade book. You wouldn't mistake it for YA or anything else, but it doesn't fit quite that trad published look. And I think, oh my God, that's why, oh my God, I'd get more sales if they were like that. Oh my goodness, I can't believe I didn't do that. But, these illustrations cost $1,000 and I don't want to have to do them again. And so, like this sort of, do I just give it up and just go forward, or do I go back and fix it? What would you say? Just give it to me.
without having sort of looked at them and analysed them next to other middle grade books, I would say, so long as you're hitting most of the conventions of middle grade books, so that would be the characters need, if there are characters on the cover, and usually there are for middle grade books, it needs to be very clear that these are children.
Got it. Tick. Okay, I got that one.
Usually it's quite they're in quite dynamic poses, so doing something kind of interesting.
Tick. All right, I got that one.
No, they're not just like standing there. The colors, as you said, very important, usually really bright. There might be multiple colors, rather than just one sort of simpler, more limited color palette, although that is also an option. The lettering, again, very important, that it has that kind of fun, more childlike look to it than a young adult book, for instance, and that it shows the genre. So if there's magic involved, you want to have some hint at that on the cover, whether it's the title or the image, usually both. Making it really clear. So I don't think that the illustration style is the be all and end all.
Okay, I'll sleep now tonight. Thanks, Holly. For now, anyway. When I make my first million, I might update them. Hey,
but yeah, I mean, that's the other thing of the beauty of being indie published is that if you do want to change the book cover and you can afford it, then that's an option that's open to you. If you're trad published, good luck getting that, convincing your publisher to do that, unless they have a good reason to do it, to sort of relaunch it. So,
but yeah, that's like really good key points. Font, I don't know. I have to get you to check that. But like on the Poppy Snow cover, the one I was saying earlier, she's a mermaid jumping out of the water, and I remember putting it online at one point and being like, are her boobs too big? Because does she look like she's at that age? Or should I make it a YA? And everyone was like, that is not a YA cover. So it doesn't matter if her boobs are too big. She's not YA. And I thought, what does a YA look like? And went and look, and they don't look like that. Like you said, they don't have that character and that. I mean, they can, but it's just very, very different. So so much to think about. But yeah, like definitely
Absolutely.
one of the things that can really impact your sales in either direction is to change your cover. So that's always a really good option to think about doing that if your sales don't reflect what you think is a really marvelous book, but you didn't invest a lot in the cover when you first got started, and that's fair enough. One of the things definitely to look at is to go and get a better cover. 100%.
It's also a really great excuse to shout about your backlist titles as well. If you're redesigning the cover, you can go yes, you can go and you can redo the blurb, you can do other things, and it's probably a good idea to do some of those other things first, because generally that's going to be less expensive to do. But if you do want to redesign your cover, it's a really good excuse to say to everyone, oh hey, remember those books that I issued like 6 years ago? Well, they're back, but they're better, or they're more appropriate for today's market, or they're more suited to the genre. Or maybe you've decided that, oh no, actually this is sort of on the borderline of middle grade and YA. Actually, I'm going to go more for the YA thing because it's not really working for me.
What do you reckon? I'll send you the cover and be like, can you tone her boobs down a little bit?
Yeah.
Make her look a bit more flat chested. 13-year-olds can have big boobs too, so maybe I'll just leave her as
I mean, that is definitely one of the main things when it comes to showing, and it's especially the difference between like a YA contemporary book and a contemporary romance book. Those two genres have a lot in common, a lot of the same kind of color palettes, same lettering styles, but what really makes them look different is that it's clear that the young adult ones, these are teenagers, and on the adult covers, these are adults. And I'm talking very much the sort of sunshiny and rainbows sort of romance books, not your sort of dark, gritty ones. The ones that have illustrated covers. Yeah. And actually, so if you want a good sort of visual representation of all of this, I actually have a free resource on my site. If you go to the resources tab on my site, I'm sure you can put this in the show notes.
I will, yes, thank you.
I have it's a free comp cover sheet. So it's a PDF that I've basically compiled a whole lot of different covers in different genres. I think I've covered most of the main genres, and so it'll have a whole lot of, I've included new and best selling in each selection, and I'm going to be updating it every 6 months or so to make sure that it's representing what's coming out now. And then I've written a little bit about each genre and what the typical conventions are with the typography, with the whether it's illustrated or it's like a photographic image. For instance, something like historical fiction. It used to be that most historical fiction covers were a photograph, usually of a woman looking off into the distance, or where you couldn't see her head. It was sort of cut off at the neck, wearing some kind of beautiful period outfit, but for whatever period it was. And maybe if it's set during World War II, there's a fighter pilot plane in the background. But now we're seeing a lot more of the kind of more decorative covers, not like a lot of illustrations, not so many photographic covers now in that genre. And that's just one example that has changed quite a lot. And also the colors that are being used are quite different to what they used to be too. So those are the kinds of things that I'm looking at and that I've analyzed in this PDF. So if you want to get hold of that, that's on my site. And
yeah,
I hope it's quite a useful.
It's just so fascinating that they can change convention like that just slowly over time. And yeah, incredible.
And it's interesting, sometimes one new book comes out. I think one of the books that really changed things in historical fiction was The Essex Serpent by Sarah Parry, which was a massive success in the publishing world back in 2015, 2016. And since then, we've seen so many more covers that have that kind of William Morris style, like wallpaper style cover, which I love because that's absolutely my jam. And we're seeing a lot more green on covers as well in historical fiction. And that was something I didn't really notice until I put together this PDF and kind of looked at them all and went, oh yeah, there's a very clear theme that wasn't quite when I used to think of historical fiction, it wasn't this, and now this is what's happening. So
that's incredible.
Yeah.
So do you write your own books as well? Is that one of the things that you do, or are you just doing covers?
I have actually written and published a couple of books. So I did a picture book quite a few years back, children's picture book that I illustrated and wrote, but it was a very sort of small project. Like I didn't have big plans for it, like distribution. It was only available in New Zealand, basically. But I wanted to sort of go through that whole process and see what it was like. And at the time I was working for a company that prints books and also does like distribution to bookshops. And so I was working with a lot of indie authors through that. And so I wanted to go through that process. I also wrote a book for them about self-publishing in New Zealand, which is still available. It's under the pen name H.L. Kennedy, because I wanted it separate to my own brand. And I am actually working on a novel.
Great.
I started it in 2018 and then basically didn't do anything with it for the next 5 years. But I'm back on it now, especially because I've been working with so many indie authors and I've been so inspired just seeing what people are doing on Instagram and reading people's manuscripts and just going, you know what, I'm feeling like I should make this happen. And I certainly don't identify as a writer, really. It's I have no plans on being an author to make money from it, but I am really enjoying writing this book, and I just feel like it needs to happen. So yeah.
That's awesome. Well done. Yay. Well, I mean, we can't wait to see what your cover design is going to be like.
Well, yeah, that's
amazing.
The other thing. I need to come up with a cover for it. Like, no pressure.
You're going to have to send Holly a brief, and then Holly's going to send back to you,
I think it'll be interesting to do because, when you're so sort of close to a project, it's quite difficult to be objective. And I still haven't quite decided if it's, I think it's fantasy adult fantasy rather than YA, but there's sort of the potential to make it more YA. So I haven't quite made that decision yet.
Yeah, fair enough. That can be a really tricky line, can't it? Yeah.
Yes. And then, of course, you've got the sort of the new adult
that's right.
genre that seems to be much more popular these days as well. But I do want my protagonist to be a bit older, like sort of in her 20s rather than a teenager.
A teenager. Yeah. There's a lot of other things though, isn't there? Like little, even in writing, genre conventions that could make that difference as to which one.
Yeah. And it is kind of borderline, so we'll see.
Oh, how exciting. Wonderful.
Yeah.
You have the most extraordinarily fun videos on your Instagram, and like definitely people you have to go 100% and follow Holly on Instagram, as it's just, oh my gosh, like I could just black everybody else out and just watch your reels all day long. And what it shows to me is you have a really deep understanding of what indie authors are doing. Because, it's so fun the way you write the scripts for these things. It's, oh my gosh, it's laugh out loud funny. I'm like, how does she know exactly what I've been doing all day and how it feels? Tell us a bit about those.
So funny because I started doing them thinking, oh, this is something that's a bit sort of fun, and like I would enjoy doing something that's a little bit more sort of lighthearted, but I hadn't really thought that they were going to be that funny. I was watching. I went on TikTok this one time. It's like the one time I've ever been on TikTok, and I came across as a comedian called Jimmy Rees, who's an Australian comedian.
He's so funny.
Yeah, and he does these pass the test little videos, like pass the test to know if to be a nurse, and it's all these little relatable things about being a nurse or being a teacher, or being a millennial. And I kind of thought, oh, I could do something like this, but make it really, really niche and be like, for romance writers or for fantasy writers. And it turned out it was not that niche, because one of them went completely viral and I was completely overwhelmed with how many people had seen it. And it's had such a good response. And the thing is, it's not even saying things that are especially funny. It's just saying things that are kind of true.
They're so good. They're just, the way you film them too, where you're the two personalities, like I'm like, how does she do that? I feel as though you're, literally pausing the camera and jumping in the other. I mean, you're not, I'm sure. You're probably doing them in one take and editing them, but
and then just editing them together. But it's just that little question and answer format works really well. And it's basically somebody asking, it's like having a job interview, like to become an indie author or to become a fantasy writer, and ask all these questions. And it's a bit absurd, but it's fun.
It's so brilliant. And I'm so pleased to hear that one of them went viral, and I hope it brought you a lot
I couldn't believe it.
Yeah, but it's just creativity like that, that just sort of gets you out there, and it's just entertaining, and it's really true. Like you said, they're really the things that you say, it's like, oh God, it's so true. Oh God, I can't remember which one. I mean, there's so many, but a few of them have like just hit home like nothing else.
Yeah.
Well done. Wow. Yeah. Well, where else do we go with this? I think I've asked you so many fantastic questions about covers. I do feel a little bit better now. I will sleep a little bit better. Thank you, Holly. I will. Do you, here's a last question. Do you review covers? Like if someone said, do you think I need a new cover and could you do it? Do you look and say, sure, or no, your cover's good, or do you not really get any of those?
It's not something I get a lot of. I get some people will come to me and say, look, I've been to another cover designer and I didn't get what I wanted, and can you help me out? That's happened a couple of times. But I would be very happy, like, if anyone wants to send me their cover and ask, like, do you think this is doing what it should? Then I'm happy to do that. I never want to put down any other designers, so that's the only thing. So I did want to do like a series on my YouTube channel where I reviewed book covers and said, yeah, what could be improved? But it's really hard because you don't know what brief that designer was given, and like if the designers had to work with what the author wants rather than what is best for the book as well. And that's sometimes the difficult thing about working with an author directly. They might have a very clear idea in their head. Oh, I want it to look like kind of like this other book, but maybe that's in a different genre. So it's tricky. But if anyone wants to DM me and say, what do you think of my cover, then I'm happy to do that sort of privately. And
I can see where some of those difficulties might lie, as you say, when you do it publicly, because you don't know the communication that they had.
No, exactly.
Yeah.
And I never want to say that another designer isn't doing their job properly, because I don't know what's happening behind the scenes. And and
there is still a level of subjectivity at the end of the day, isn't there?
There is. I think the main thing is to consider, like, is it fitting into the genre? Is the genre very clear? Is this going to appeal to the kinds of people who are looking for this kind of book? And then things like, is it clear if this is part of a series? And do we have that continuity between the different books in the series?
Amazing. Well,
it's a really hard thing, though.
It is.
Like, if you're going into it and wanting to design your own cover, it's a challenge, because like I do this full time, and I still have a hard time keeping up with what's happening and knowing all the things that I need to know. So you've probably seen your own evolution back to when you started versus now, and you often still feel like a bit like you're chasing the trends or chasing the, like you say, when you compare, could I have done that better? Could I have done that different? I mean, I suppose the answer is always going to be yes. But what I will finish off asking you is how much of it is really the way you work, and may be none of it, I'm asking, is sort of an intuitive process of, I think this feels landed for this. And yes, it could be a million other different things, but this actually, because that's got to count in there somewhere, doesn't it? Oh, absolutely. It's a big part of it, and I think this is where my art history background comes in as well, is like having looked at so many images, sort of dissected so many images of and paintings and things. You do get a good sense of composition, how that works, and in some ways, when it comes down to it, the composition is one of the most important things, because everything within a book cover is sort of a smaller composition within a bigger composition, but maybe that's getting too technical. But a lot of it is very intuitive. Like, I'm not thinking about like dividing the page up into thirds, for instance, which is a very common suggestion when you're starting out. Like, the rule of thirds, if you're taking photographs, if you're composing a painting, a book cover is a very important thing. That's something that's so ingrained now, I don't have to think about it. It's a lot of trial and error, and then sort of you feel like you're getting closer to how it's meant to be, and then eventually you do get to that point where it is. But I find that with colors as well, it's a very intuitive process. And while I'm very familiar with color theory, like complementary colors and limited color palettes and all these kinds of things, it's still very much like I'm just gonna mess around for a bit and see what sort of works. I wish I had a more sort of definitive process for color, but whenever I try doing that, it always sort of comes back to this quite intangible, like, let's pull this together and this together. And
yeah. Look, to be honest, I'm learning that even with book writing. Like I started off super intuitive and really crazy, and then structure, into the intuition, and then sort of thought, no, I need more structure. If I only had a perfect process structure, and now I've gone back to, let's just go crazy intuitive, and then trust that the structure part of me is still there. Actually, she doesn't completely leave the building when crazy intuitive me comes along and writes the most extraordinarily stupid stuff. But then the editor comes in at the very end, right? The editor me, who can actually tie these two very separate kind of worlds together and then hopefully create mastery. Look, this is how I want it to look. Does it look like that? I don't know.
Yeah.
And that takes time, doesn't it? And just practice, and that's what mastery is, just time and repetition and practice. So, we might want to be Holly overnight because we're like, I could do a cover like that. That doesn't look so special. Just a few, you're going to do that.
I mean, you probably can.
But you can't. That's the point. You actually can't, because there's so much intuition and skill blended together to create that thing that you create, which would take me another 10 years at doing it, like you said, full time every day like you do. So, I love that we finished with that, because I feel like that's really wrapped it up quite so beautifully. And
I mean, that's why that process and that structure is so important, though. That's why we have a brief to go back to. Like, the colors, for instance, will be dictated by what we've decided in the brief, what the tone of the book is, what the genre is again, and there's usually a direction, and I do find that with creativity, having those limitations is really, really important, because I mean, as a writer, I'm sure that we know the scariest thing in the world is just a blank page, right?
Yeah, it is. Yeah, especially for me, it's thinking like there's nothing scary about the blank page. And then if I'm drawing or something, I'm like, Jesus, did I think I could fill it, make it look beautiful? So there's a lapse between my skill level and where I want it to be, and in writing, it can be the same thing. But I always come back to everything in life, to me, feels like a process of layering. So, even like you said, your first go at that's really scratchy kind of like, is that an illustration? You layer, and then it just becomes this masterpiece. But I wish I could be a little,
writing.
Yeah, a little bird on your shoulder, like just really watch you over a series of weeks to see how your cover design comes.
Interesting you say that, because I did a giveaway on my Instagram that closed this month, and I'm actually going to be I'm working with the winner in August, and I'm going to be showing the entire process, all the behind the scenes stuff, including those scratchy little sketches that don't make much sense, all of that, talking about the decisions along the way while working with this brief, because I've never had the opportunity to do that before, where I'm really delving in behind the scenes in real time. I've done it before for personal projects, and I've done it sort of in hindsight, but this is totally new to be able to do that full behind the scenes. So I'm really excited for that. I'm Holly Dunn Design over on Instagram if you want to follow along. Yeah.
Oh, that is so exciting. Definitely. I cannot wait to watch you do that. There you go. I can be a bird on your shoulder. How exciting.
Absolutely.
And go. All the links will be in the show notes. Go definitely follow Holly on Instagram. At the very least, I'm ordering you, because you're just so fun and creative and really, really, really inspiring. And as I say, I stick with my original word of you, which is the genius, because, it really does show through in your designs. A lot of heart, a lot of research, a lot of work, a lot of dedication. And you've taught me so much about cover design, and gotten rid of not all, some of my nightmares. I won't wake up quite so much sweating in my...
Well, do send through those covers and I'll have a look.
Do I?
I should have done my research ahead of time and looked at them.
Thank you so much for being on the show today, Holly.
Yeah, thank you.
Did you find that interview valuable? Great! Now be an awesome human and go and leave a review because it helps the podcast out so much. Want to read the show notes? Check out the Children's Book Author Podcast.com. Want to find out more about me, Elena Page? Find me at elenapage.com or come and say hello on social at Elena Page Books. Until next time, keep writing and keep learning.